Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to the Full Moon Positive Book Club. I started this book club last year before COVID took over our lives. I started as an actual in-person event here in Piermont, New York, where I live. And we had a couple of sessions, and then the rest of the world changed and turned upside down. The purpose and goal of this group is to create positivity from one positive book to the next, from one full moon to the next full moon. I don't know, are you affected by the full moon? I am. And tonight's full moon is called the wolf moon. It is also called the cold moon. For obvious reasons. The first full moon of the year and the wolf moon was named after the Native Americans. All of the different moon titles that we have are from the Native Americans. And but today we have a very special guest. I have to tell you, this book, My Beautiful Detour, is one of the most life-affirming books that I have ever read. And if anyone knows me, you come into my office, my shelves are full of books on positivity and self-awareness. Our guest today, Amy Oestreicher, has gone through the most amazing journey. God bless her. She is here. Her story is not a tragedy. Her story is uplifting. It fills my soul with her tenacity and just getting through life. And I think especially now, more than ever, because of what we've all gone through and what we're all going through with COVID, this is a very important book for this time. So, Amy, welcome to our platform today. And before we start, I want to ask you, how are you doing really in the midst of this crazy world we find ourselves in?
I know it's such a weird question asking how everyone's doing right now. Is it strange to say I'm at ease? I'm happy. I'm here. I've learned how to take each moment as it comes, and I'm doing well. I'm creating things right now, and I'm living and breathing. And I get to talk to you finally, so I'm good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Before we talk about your amazing journey and the many detours along the way, and I hope you don't mind with what I'm about to say or do and go in that direction. But yesterday was National Day of Remembrance. And you talk a lot in your book about your grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor. Her story is such an amazing story. And I thought that we'd start there today.
Start there.
So let's talk about your grandmother. And as I said, she survived the Holocaust. And if you can just take us back to that time.
Yeah. Well, not back to that time because I was not born yet, but the stories that eventually came out did not, from her survival, didn't come out till much later. But I learned that when she was 18, she was sent to Auschwitz, and she survived because she was an amazing seamstress. And she was forced to, sew Nazi uniforms, and she remembers the day she was liberated from Auschwitz, and the soldiers came and said, go home, you're free. And she thought to herself, okay, but what, where do I go? And I didn't really I knew she was a Holocaust survivor because, I went to Hebrew school and I had learned what the Holocaust was. And there was always this sadness in my grandmother's eyes, but just that little bit of sadness because more than anything, she was just this joyful person who loved celebrating everything. And so in my third TED Talk, I talk about how for like a middle school health project, we had to do a good deed for someone else. So I'm like, my grandma's always throwing all these great parties. I want to throw a big party for my grandma's birthday. And I surprised her with all of our neighbors and everyone who looked at my grandmother like their own grandmother. And she came in and I didn't expect, as a seventh grader, that she'd come in, like see all this and just start crying. And she said, my friends didn't survive. Like, why am I still here? And that was a little thread. Excuse me. That was a little thread of that I knew she had been through something horrible. But it wasn't until much later on when I did all of these oral histories with her relatives that I realized what a journey she went on and how strong she had to be at a time where, post-traumatic stress disorder was not a word, or, she came to New York and half the people didn't even know or believe what she had been through. How did she come?
And she also lost her husband.
She lost her first husband, who apparently she was madly in love with. And she eventually married my grandpa, who we were all madly in love with anyway. But, this man was her first love that we heard stories about, but never, still remains a mystery. So she definitely, I definitely carry her with me all the time. And, I still find my ways of saying goodbye to her because, I was not able to say goodbye to her because of the medical things that happened in my life afterwards. But I still feel her with me.
Well, I want to go back to your childhood. Let's start there. You grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut.
Yeah.
You have a huge, loving family. Tell us about your childhood. One of the things that I love in your book, I actually pulled something here that I'm going to share with everyone. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is probably your most recent artwork. Is that right?
Oh, that was the second painting I ever made in Yale Hospital.
Okay. I saw that on Twitter this morning and I thought, this is so wonderful. Because I mean, you have this love of trees and nature, and you actually had dreams as a child of flying trees and everything.
They were my best friends.
Yes.
I don't know why.
I always like to honor those that have gone before me, and I'm just going to mention Barbara Walters. She did an interview with Katharine Hepburn long before you were born, in which she asked Katharine Hepburn, if you were a tree, what kind of a tree would you be? And of course,
that question.
Katharine Hepburn said she would be a mighty oak. So as an homage to Barbara Walters, what kind of a tree would you be?
Oh my God. I would honestly be a Japanese maple tree. But I would be so many trees. I mean, don't make me go into that territory because I honestly don't know why trees have always resonated with me since the time I was little. Like the most exciting thing I could do, I mean, moving on from when I was little to middle school to high school, I couldn't wait just walking out of class and I saw such life in trees. Like they got me, they understood me. And maybe because I was always a a dancer and a creative person that like I would move my arms like them and I would feel the wind sway through them and I would be like, oh, they said hello. And maybe it's because our family like always took us to Disney World where I was used to animatronic like things coming to life. Seriously, maybe that's why. But I was fascinated, and again, bring this back to religion and Judaism and spirituality. I loved finding the hidden life all around me, and for me, that was trees. And I got to show you really quick. This is actually just something I just made as I'm getting into three-dimensional like puppetry and mask work. But
If you could move it over the other, yes, wow.
well, this is a crazy mask. But it's of the four elements I got water, earth, fire, wind, which I'm currently creating a new one woman show on. But the elements of all around us have always they've always spoken to me, and they really felt like when I couldn't really relate to my friends about going to parties or those kind of things. Like I was an extroverted person. I just liked being extroverted in like the social butterfly world of nature. I just saw this like booming life all around me, and that always kept me going. And honestly, that still is what keeps me going. COVID can't take that away.
And you have these brothers who were very, very protective of their.
Terrible.
Yeah, but you discovered early on that you had a gift, and I'm talking about the gift with your voice because you were a singer and you wanted to pursue this as a career. And then you found this great vocal coach, mentor, teacher, Blaine. If you want to tell everyone about Blaine, because as part of your journey, I think it's very important to tell that aspect of your life. And I want to applaud you for your brutal honesty in terms of dealing with this.
Well, the truth is I couldn't have written this 10 years ago. Any survivor of sexual assault will that it takes years to, or it should, it takes whatever time you need to process it, especially to put it into words. And and certain names have been changed in this book because this happened long before the Me Too era, where more voices were being acknowledged. But I'm glad you brought up my love of trees and all that stuff before, because as a teen I felt I loved reading about mindfulness, like before it was like a cool thing, and like nature and all that, and that meant so much to me. And I loved my friends, but none of them really got it. And so I ended up with this professional voice teacher in New York, because he was very talented at musical theater and he wanted to work with me. But as we worked more and I was, acting more through these songs, I was, talking about like what I was, who I was speaking to, the trees and the nature. And we realized that, I realized that he loved nature too. And he felt like I was an old soul. And so I finally felt like I had a friend. Like I'm 15, but like at least this person like understands why nature is so cool, and all of that. And so I started really looking forward to those lessons, not only for the voice lessons, but someone who showed me what art songs were for the first time, and poetry about Joyce Kilmer's like tree poem, all these things that I had no idea about. All I had was walking around my block seeing trees. And so I really developed a really, real appreciation for his wisdom, and he became my mentor. And I was studying with him all throughout 15. And then when I turned 17, then he started sexually abusing me, which for like, you know, a sheltered girl in Connecticut, or for anyone, came out of nowhere. And
Now, you go into this in the book, but for those who haven't read the book yet, and I hope you, again, we want everyone to buy this book, but he became a family friend as well.
he actually wrote a letter to my mother saying how close he felt as a mentor and that he would love to be my godfather. And I don't know, I guess like us Jews don't really have like godfathers and stuff, but my mom was like, you know, he feels so close to you, and you seem to be like teaching her a lot. So you know, it's really an honor. You know, he came to one Passover dinner we had, and he really felt like a friend of the family. You
He
know, and
acclimated himself as part of your family.
exactly right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And after the abuse started, you began to shut down, and in a way that angered some people, because you were not the vibrant Amy that they were used to. But your mom sensed something was going on.
Eventually, I mean, the sexual abuse happened for nearly a year. So it took like a period of months, but at first, like I was confused by myself, because I dissociated, I had gone out of body, but I didn't know what those terms were. So it was interesting that the only way I could tell something had changed within me is that I love taking walks, in nature with my trees. And like the day after, the first time everything happened, I was home, taking a walk, and I couldn't connect with my trees anymore. I felt like on this numb autopilot mode. And so I just thought something was wrong with me, like, oh, maybe I'm tired, or maybe I lost my inspiration, or, he obviously was taking no blame for it. I mean, I didn't know anything about, PTSD or how trauma affects someone. So I really went numb. So the change in me really scared me at first. And then, at school, I was always like the loud person doing like leaps and twirls around the halls. And suddenly I was just like wearing my pajamas to school with like my head down, just speaking in this numb voice. So, they didn't recognize me either. And then obviously my family didn't know what was going on either. Especially when I started just becoming more and more anxious. And I still couldn't really tell what was wrong for a long time. So yeah, it was a confusing period for all of us.
Let me ask you, what was Blaine's demeanor as all this was going on? You talk very vividly in the book about the changes that took place within yourself, but were there outward changes within him as well?
From what I could see, I kept wondering myself, like, I want, my voice teacher back. What happened? It was interesting that you said tonight's full moon was the wolf moon, because I wrote a full-length play where he's kind of portrayed as the wolf, and he has like a wolf mask and all that kind of stuff. But I I couldn't, just like I couldn't really connect and tap into like my tree friends. I didn't understand why this person who I had always respected somehow seemed like a fake now. In retrospect, it's so funny looking back on it, wondering, I just felt like I was in the middle of this big puzzle that had just exploded. Like, everything I trusted just fell over. It was a confusing time for me, definitely.
When did you feel that you were starting to function, not fully, but again, uh, prior to this beginning to happen in your life?
What do you mean fully
I
function?
mean, that you started to, get on with your life and try to push that to the side.
Oh boy. Well, finally, and I talk about in my book how I put the pieces together that I was sexually abused, but finally it came out when I finally told my mother the April of my senior year. And then we were going to, Passover was coming up. We were going to celebrate, like, as a way of, like, you know what, let's just cut this guy off from our lives. We'll, get you into therapy, all that kind of stuff. And then, 2 weeks after that was our Passover Seder. And that's when I had the big medical calamity that.
Well, we're going to get there.
Okay.
You were prepping for your prom.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, like the Seder was kind of more exciting to me than the prom. You just got to throw the prom in there because, like, yeah, it's your senior year. But I had gotten into the musical theater program at University of Michigan. I was so excited to go. I just found out that morning of our Seder, and yeah, and everything was going to. We're going to figure out how to put the pieces together, from there. But we wanted like that to be our new start. And I had only told my mom at this point, and I told her, don't tell anyone else yet. Let me like work through it, and I'll do all that. But then that never got to happen.
Well, I'm going to assume. I mean, like any young 18-year-old or 17-year-old, you're excited about what life has to offer you. Life is going on as quote unquote normal, because after reading your book, I question that word now more than ever.
Me
Tell
too.
tell everyone about uh, the big, the big,
Big thing.
the big major detour that happened in your life.
Yeah, so I just got in my college acceptance letters. I was more driven than anyone I knew, like musical theater, musical theater. And then that night at Passover, I just ended up with a really, really bad stomach ache that was not going away through that night, and then through the next day, and the next day, where my dad finally came home from work and said, something's not right about this. We got to take her to the emergency room because I was in this awful pain. So I had never done anything like that, like gone to a hospital besides like, physicals. So but I remember having to be wheeled in on a wheelchair because I just never felt pain like that. And so, everything else is told to me that when I got there, the surgeons just like put me out, and just once they cut into me, my stomach just burst to the top of the operating room because there was so much internal pressure. So yes, my stomach. Some people ask if it's like a metaphor or not. No, my stomach literally exploded. It's not like an illness or a thing people have. It, I guess it was kind of a freak thing, or as one doctor calls it, a surgical disaster. But I guess I had gotten sepsis, and it was really divine timing because if I had gotten there a minute later, the internal fluid would have gone to all of my organs, and then I really would have died. But that being said, I ended up in a coma for months, and when I woke up, I was a bit out of it, but I was wondering, okay, like, so I get to go to college now? And that's when I learned that life does not always go as one plans.
Well, I want to go back to that night of the Seder and everything. Were you feeling, I know that you said that you were feeling this pain. Did it come on all of a sudden, or were you starting to feel, something's not right here? What sometimes most people, myself included, are stubborn. We know that we're feeling discomfort or something, but we are not going to go to the doctor the moment we feel a stomach ache or a pain or something. But your father also is a doctor. So was it your doctor? I mean, was it your father who made that deciding factor to get you to the hospital? What was that straw that snapped to get you there?
Right. Well, my dad, definitely rushed me there when, after 2 days, I had this terrible pain that was not going away. And he looked and he said my stomach was distended, which I had never heard that word before. But, there are, multiple theories about like why this happened. And one of the very plausible theories, especially as I ended up doing more research, is that, ever since the abuse, like some kind of stress ulcer was forming because, I never, felt like physically okay, since the abuse, just with this unrest. I mean, I wouldn't say I was in like terrible stomach pain from the moment I was sexually abused, but there was definitely something I was sitting with. And it wasn't until many, many years later that I eventually got to college at 25 that I ended up taking a science of stress class and ended up writing my thesis on the gastroenterological issues and gastrointestinal issues that can happen after PTSD. And that was the first time I was reading all these things and thinking, oh my God, of course there is a relationship between the mind and the body. And that also brought me back to my grandmother's story, remembering how, she would lie on the couch all the time, sometimes saying she had stomach pain. And, I was thinking, like, what do you do in a world where you obviously are coming back with trauma? And I guess a lot of survivors had to just, sit with it, and they live lives. And, my grandma led a beautiful life, but I always wonder, if the help and the awareness that we all have now was available back then, how it would have changed her. And skipping ahead a lot, that's also really why I'm passionate about informing everyone through what I love, through theater, about PTSD, about trauma, and working with communities, because a person does not heal in isolation. You don't heal by doing these reflective journals, just by that. And you heal through understanding and empathy. Healing does not happen in a vacuum. It doesn't mean anything if no one hears your story. So that's why I'm very passionate about helping people that think they haven't been affected by trauma, or communities that have. Listen, this is how PTSD affects the individual, but this is also how it affects the community, because the more we can talk about it, or, communicate about it in some way. I mean, that's why, again, I'm jumping to a million things, but
Okay. I'm right there with you.
I'm a jumper. I gotta say, that's why, like, the ancient plays of Sophocles, those were, or so I've researched, those were originally meant for war veterans to act in, so they could share their story with society, saying, like, this is what we've been through. And that's why I think the arts are such a wonderful platform for anyone to at least try out and start a conversation. Because, to be honest, like, words, I mean, it's easy to, not easy, but you can read someone's story and read a book, but words are not the easiest thing to get out. As a survivor of trauma, it took me years to like verbalize things. You know, I had, thank goodness, like I didn't really have like social media like during like the 10 years after my coma, because I needed that time to play with images and dance and seeing like what nonverbal ways all these things were connecting in my head, until finally I could put some words to them. There's me going off on things again, but yeah, back to you, Richard.
Well, I want to go back again to the hospital.
Yeah.
When I was a small child, my sister, who God bless her, is still with us. But at 3 years old, she had kidney and liver disease. My parents were told that she would not live to be even 4 years old. My parents, she was in a hospice situation. I lived with my grandparents. I get this real strong sense of family through your words in the book, with your family being by your bedside, your poor dog at home getting fed from time to time when they were coming home. But your whole family is there around the bed. And God bless your mom and your brothers who began to keep a journal, a day-to-day journal chronicling what you were going through, because they never gave up on you, ever.
Yeah, well, to just to revive that, I have three brothers. My brother Jeff was the one that kept the journal. And interesting, I always love thinking of this as a great example of how trauma affects others, puts them on detours that can really turn out to be really nice things. But Jeff had just graduated and for political science, but he came right to the ICU because my dad called all my brothers and said, the doctors say I wouldn't make it through the night. And so Jeff's way of coping was keeping a journal on his laptop of every day of the first 72 days of my coma, where literally you have like April 25th, 2005, they say you're not going to make it through the night, took your stomach out, all the way through where you see the family kind of making their new normal, where, one of my brothers is dating the night nurses and dad's sleeping in the janitor's closet, and they've made a home and coped the best they can. But it was also his way of, he writes to me in this journal, hoping that I wake up soon and all that. And I discovered that journal on my computer years later. And it was, I'd never really gotten that perspective. And I ended up writing a play on that. But then later when I was putting this play together, I got my mom and my other brothers to share some of what that was like for me. And again, like everyone had to be numb for that. So the stories came out, a thread at a time, little by little. And then soon they would unravel into these, longer stories the more you remember. Just like when I started journaling, I'd try to think of one thing and then it would take me into a billion other memories I didn't even know were stored. But all in all, I learned that, my family was, by my side throughout. And any doctor that came in and said, like, nope, she's not going to be able to eat or drink again. She's not going to be, walking out of here. My mom would like take them out of there and be like, don't you dare say that. In front of
your mom, I mean, she was very open-minded. She brought a Reiki expert into, for healing. She even brought a psychic in. And it jumped out at me that the psychic said to your mom, she's deciding whether she wants to live or die. This is what the psychic said to your mom.
And mom's like, you can go now.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. So then tell us about the aftermath. I mean, you come out of the coma, the recovery begins, and the lifestyle changes that you had to implement in your life. And you mentioned earlier that it's not just what you're going through, it's what your family is going through, because your family has to adjust as well.
Yeah, well, when I finally was alert enough from my coma, I guess the doctors felt like, okay, now is the time we can throw the big bomb at her and tell her what happened. And I know that wasn't easy for them either, but I still remember it was like kind of sitting your kid down and telling them, okay, this is, you know, he told me, so Amy, we had to take your stomach out, and so that means you can't eat or drink. And at that point, I was still, in a hospital bed covered in a million tubes and drains. So I couldn't really think about, food or drink. I could barely keep my eyes open. But once he told me that, it was like, well, are you, like, ever? Like, do you want to explain what that means? And he couldn't guarantee if that would ever happen again, even like an ice cube. And so that was depressing / when I became obsessed with every drip of water I could see anywhere around the ICU unit. And so, I coped however I could through the hospital, but it's one thing when you're in the hospital and you're in this like isolated, like sick nest. But, I always thought, or not, well, then you think about, like, we talk about like what's normal. I think, okay, the day they let me out of here, that's when like everything will be normal and I can eat or drink. So I was a little more than disappointed when they discharged me from the ICU, because they said I was healthy enough. Like, there's nothing else they could do for me there. But I was just out of there, and they weren't going to tell me still, like, if I'd ever be able to eat or drink again. And that day that we were discharged from the hospital, we moved into a new house too. So it was like total, what do I recognize from my old life anymore? And then it was like the idea of, okay, now I'm go from like this big fish in a small pond to this like little fish in this huge world. Like, how do I even interact in a world where I can hardly walk, but like I can't drink, and like there's a sink in a kitchen that I live in now. I can't eat, and like my family's here, and my mom ended up like sneaking her like trail mix in a purse, and they tried to clear out the fridge and all that stuff, but they had to eat. And you realize how much food is a part of, besides living, like social things. Like, we tried having a game night, but that didn't work when people wanted water and I just started crying. It's just it was really, really difficult. But I got to tell you, the thing that got me through that initial hump was that right after the ICU, I saw that a local theater was holding auditions for Oliver. And like, I somehow convinced my parents that it would be good for me to try out. And I was still like kind of learning to sing and walk. But I tried out, and I was surprised that once my tracheotomy was out, I could actually like belt again. And forget about ensemble, they gave me the lead. I was Nancy and Oliver. I mean, I couldn't take like the drink breaks and all that, but being in community with like the safe container of theater and doing what I love, like, at least reminded me of who I was. And that got me through the first few months of being home. And then I could.
Now, I want to ask you, who made the deciding factor for you to be in the show? Was it the director? Was it the casting director? Who was that person? And I'd like you to mention that person by name, because they need to be acknowledged.
Yes. Oh my God. And I love Ben, who I love so much. I still talk to you. Ben Firmer directed it at Curtain Call in Stanford, who Lou Ursone started that. And that's actually the first. When I was 13, I got into my first adult community theater production there, doing the Three Scrooges, which was like Christmas Carol over and like Three Stooges. So that had always been like a home to me. So it felt like a coming home. And that whole cast, I mean, thank you to that whole cast for being so supportive for me with all these bags everywhere and this big, IV pole that I had to have at night. And then for directing me through all that. Yeah, it was a hard time. And Lou for that theater always being there for me. And yeah. And then I just performed that for their first outdoor social distancing concert. So I'll continue to support them. And Ben, is a great, teaches music and theater, in Connecticut. So very just grateful for the community around me at that time. That was also a great source of support, for sure.
Now, as you're putting your life back together and life goes on, you decide that you're going to put your story on stage as a cabaret show. Tell us about that process, and what was the deciding factor for you? Obviously, at the very core of who you are an artist, an entertainer, singer, actress, but it's a very personal thing to take your story and put it in front of an audience. Take us back to that process.
Yeah, well, this was a longer detour that I did not expect. I always wanted to get back to musical theater. And I started, after my coma, obviously, because when my stomach exploded, it blew a hole right through my diaphragm, and they had to cut half of my esophagus to reroute it. So, it was not the same instrument I was working with. But the physical stuff aside, I had to make the decision after my coma that I wanted to start studying voice again, which, not eating and drinking out of the hospital, I had to stay very, very numb, which protected me from, a drop of water killing me. But it also protected me from all those memories of sexual abuse that I didn't really have the energy to go into what I'm trying to do with this medical stuff. So the decision to take voice lessons was very hard. I mean, I tried a few different ones, and, they were, it was a journey for me to find, a voice teacher that I felt comfortable with. But as I started singing again, and I started to feel my own strength again, and I started aching for theater again, I realized that, there were songs that meant a lot to me on my journey. And then for a quick, cliff note of the detours that led me to that, I could finally eat after 13 surgeries for a week. And then my wound exploded, and I was sent to Yale Hospital, where I couldn't eat or drink again for a very, very long time. So frustrating. But on that detour, that's where I picked up a paintbrush for the first time. And I painted my first painting, which is the one on the cover of my book, Singing Tree. But because of that, that's how the Today Show heard about me, and they had me on. Kathy Lee used to do this segment, like everyone has this.
With, I'm going to say this, our dear friend, David Friedman.
We're getting to you, David, because we love you.
Yes.
But I didn't meet you yet. So that's where I met David, who I was so excited about meeting, who wrote a song for me with Kathy Lee called Still Alive. And I had known who David was, because he writes great stuff. So I went over to him after, and I'm like, I'm also a singer. I'm not just a survivor of a lot of stuff. Would you want to maybe work on some songs with me or a cabaret act? And he's like, sure. And then it turns out we live like 15 minutes away from each other in Connecticut. So I started, David, he's such a lovely, warm guy. So I started going over to his house, going through songs, and eventually singing that song that was made for me, Still Alive. And I realized, like, yeah, I do have something to put together. So David Friedman recommended me to his other friend, who I should shout out to too, David Brunetti. We love you.
Yeah.
And he and I started working on a cabaret act where this was the first time. It's one thing remembering this like blob of memories as they come up, but putting this act together, I talk about in my book, was so transformative because, in order to create this story, I had to put all these memories and random journalings into a theatrical arc. So I was forced to look at all these things and be like, oh, this led to this. And if my life didn't take this detour, I would have never met this person. I would have never learned this about myself. And I never would have gotten here. And unless you want to have like a one woman show sob story therapy session, you gotta come up with like, what's your message? What's your takeaway? And when being forced to string it together, I was able to step back and look at it and be like, you know what? Like, I can't even tell you what my life would have been like if, this had never happened, because all these things have made me who I am. Mm-hmm. And so putting that, even just writing the script was such a transformative process for me. And that was really the first time I was able to call it a beautiful detour. Because I realized had this not happened, I would have never learned any of that about myself. And so I was able to tell my story in a way I felt proud of. And it's so funny. I premiered that in 2012 at the Triad in New York, again before the Me Too era and all that stuff. And it was mostly talking about surviving the medical trauma. And I had like 2 or 3 sentences in there that before my trauma and a song. I was sexually abused, and then the coma happened. But it shows the more you feel comfortable with your story and how you express it. For me, it was performing it in art. You become more and more comfortable with it, where I could like expand on that in a comfortable way. And now, I'm not going to say it's nothing, but it's fulfilling for me to speak about it if it helps others. And I think it's because I found my way of becoming comfortable with it. And I'd say that to any survivor. There's like, people sometimes call me for interviews saying like, so what do you think like the barrier to reporting is, or how many years statistically does it take a survivor to report? I said, there are no statistics. Like, everyone needs to go at their own pace, which is why, honestly, the Me Too era made me a little worried, because I felt like maybe some survivors could feel pressure to speak about it, like they should now. And if you feel ready to, then completely fine. But for me, my years of isolation were probably good for me, where I could have time to really process these events for myself. And thank goodness there was no social media where you can like post before you even know you posted it, because that time was all taken internally. And I didn't know if I'd ever be able to share it, but you know what? Eventually I did, and I did it in the Amy way, which was on stage in front of New York theater critics. But not every survivor needs to do that either. That's how Amy does it, I guess.
Well, I love the fact that you say that you did it the Amy way. And no, I love that. That's the name of your next book, by the way.
Okay.
The Amy way.
By the way, thank you later.
Right. But before we run out of time, and this is you inspire me on so many levels. You truly do. I've cried through this book. I've laughed through the book because there is some humor in the book.
There's a lot of humor.
There's a lot of humor there. And I just love your outlook on the way you look at life. When did you know that this book was completed, that it was ready to be released? And what was your hope that the takeaway would be for people who read this book?
Yeah. So the book, I'm great at writing and creating and producing things. I'm sure many artists will resonate about like, when do you step away and call it done? Or maybe that's just me. But it took me 2 years to write. It took me 5 years to edit because this was like an encyclopedia. I mean, listen, I guess I've been through a lot. But also I wanted to share all the joys and the discoveries I made on that journey, and that it wasn't always easy, but because of those things, I found other ways. I didn't set myself up for thinking, okay, I'm going to write my memoir. I was just looking through my laptop and I saw that I had just been journaling all this time about these memories that came up when they did. And I wanted, people had to know. I mean, it's one thing having a little news clip coming out saying, girl's stomach explodes, goes years without eating or drinking, survives after 28 surgeries. But people wonder, they ask me how are you such a positive person? And I gotta be honest, I'm not a positive person. No, that's the truth. I've learned it's more important to be a present person than a positive person. So when you see me smiling and laughing, it's because I know what tears feel like now. When you can't eat or drink, you have to stay purposely numb because I don't care how many calories you're getting through an IV. Don't tell me hunger is not psychological too, right? So I had to train myself to go on autopilot. But the day I could finally feel a tear for the first time, that's when I could feel everything. So this joy right now that I'm having now, it's because I'm here. I get to talk to you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm in grad school right now in between advising sessions. I've just created some art. And that's why I also think this book is especially important now, because it's so easy to just let the news paralyze us with the statistics. Listen, we know this is COVID era at this point. We know we have to wear a mask, which I'm selling with my artwork on.
Oh, great.
But putting that aside, whatever has been happening with politics and the economy and everything else, it took me a long time to realize, as someone that disassociated because of all this, that this moment I'm in right now, no matter what, I can be present for. So I think the positivity and the laughter comes from being in the moment. But, you're allowed to feel sad or angry, or you should, when life doesn't go our way, but be present with those things. And you asked what I hope the takeaway message is. I mean, I call myself a creative fireball, but that being said, to anyone, you don't have to be an artist or a singer or a dancer to call yourself creative. We all deserve to have that title. And you might think that's a little takeaway, but that's honestly what keeps me going, because creativity is really, it's just a mindset. it's a way to look at things differently, including this time that we're all in, right now.
Right.
We could see this as like doomsday, or we could say like this is one leaf on the path. I speak in leaf metaphors because I like my tree buddies still. They're still there for me. But this is one moment. And believe it or not, like years later, we're going to look back on this and be like, remember when we, right? You're going to miss all this.
Right.
So take a breath.
Yes. I can't believe this, but we are at the end of our program.
Take a breath.
And this hour, I mean, I will cherish this. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. I want to thank everybody who did tune in today.
Thank you all.
If you enjoyed the show, and I hope you all did, and if you haven't done so already, please go to my website, richardskipper.com, and sign my guest book with your thoughts about the show. That helps boost me in other markets. I also want to let everyone know that tomorrow night, very special show at 8 o'clock tonight, and this is only going to be through YouTube. You'll sit down and see my interview with Connie Francis. So please join us tomorrow night if you can. And I also want to let you know that the next full moon is on Saturday, February 27th, and I have Messages from Beyond with the Mountain Medium, James Kennedy and Muriel Paluzzi. And I'm very excited about both of those shows. I also end all my shows by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list, the first name that pops up. I want you to go to Amazon or your favorite local bookseller and buy 2 copies of My Beautiful Detour. Keep one for yourself and send one to the first friend that pops up. It's an amazing story, and everyone has to read this.
Richard, then can I say one thing about that then? Because the audiobook that I narrated during this pandemic just came out last week.
The audiobook
by Tony Award-winning and big mentor of mine, William Finn, does a great afterword for it too. So if you don't like reading and you want to listen to me talk forever, audiobook's out now too.
That's great. That's great. Now, before we end the show, I want to give you the final word. Anything that you want to talk about that we've talked about today that you want to expound upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to the world right now. And remember, everybody, keep the positivity flowing.
And the presence. I would say in my book, I talk about these 4 skills of resilience that I realized in retrospect that could get through any, unknown period of time. If I can just say anything to anyone here, that we're all experiencing this universal stall in whatever thoughts we hope were ahead. So what do we have right now? We have right here. And if that sounds cheesy, go eat some cheese and enjoy this moment. And then that anyone wants to send anything to me, my favorite food now is cheese. So you can send me cheese or
Great.
Or buy my book.
That's wonderful.
All right.
Thank you. I want to get one of those mugs. I'm going to talk to you later about how to get one.
It's on my plate, my friend. On my plate.
Great. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Richard. This is so fun.
Thank you.